Welcome to episode 2 of the Crypto Sharia series. In this episode, we're doing something different. We're looking at staking and how staking works and the Sharia compliance of staking operations, blockchain, smart contracts, and digital assets. It's the interplay of these three technologies and softwares which really give birth and give power to the Web3 economy. We want to understand how blockchain works because staking is an element within the entire blockchain ecosystem. Then we review proof of work, proof of stake, this kind of validation that happens and this block selection process. It's extremely important to know how blockchain works, how staking works technically, before there can be any Sharia commentary. Stay tuned. We are going through everything to do with digital assets, staking, liquidity pooling, every question that is typically raised from a Sharia compliance perspective. We hope to give a thorough and comprehensive answer in these series. Welcome to episode 2 of the Crypto Sharia series. If you haven't yet watched episode 1, make sure to watch episode 1 in which we discuss everything to do with digital assets, its Sharia compliance, how we can conceive digital assets from a Sharia perspective and from an Islamic finance perspective, and also how we analyze different digital assets at facet. In this episode, episode 2, we're doing something different. We're looking at staking and how staking works and the Sharia compliance of staking operations. So let's dive in. So the overview of this episode, we're doing 3 things. We want to understand how blockchain works. What is blockchain? How does it all work? Because staking is an element or a mechanism within the entire blockchain ecosystem. Then we want to review how proof of stake works and how staking actually works. And finally, we want to end the session with understanding and analyzing staking from a Sharia compliance perspective. The reason why it's critical to understand these 3 elements and to begin the discussion with blockchain is because the entire Web3 ecosystem, the Web3 scaffolding, the Web3 infrastructure is built and bonded with 3 elements: blockchain, smart contracts, and digital assets. It's the interplay of these 3 technologies and softwares which really give birth and give power to the Web3 economy. Hence, understanding blockchain is crucial to understand how staking works then and how the entire Web3 system actually works. So what is blockchain? A blockchain is a distributed database that maintains a continuously growing list of ordered records called blocks. Now, when we say distributed database, what do we mean? We mean that data is stored and synchronized across multiple computers, multiple nodes. There's multiple individuals across the world storing and continuously synchronizing this data. So the data isn't sitting in one place. It's decentralized, it's distributed. And likewise, when we say blocks, what do we mean? A block is just simply a data structure which bundles together transactions, informations, records, plus metadata. That's what exists in a particular block. And shortly, we'll look how a block is composed and what is within a block on the blockchain. But to keep it simple right now, just think of a block as a bundle of information. That's all it is. And that information is part of an entire chain of blocks. So this new block that's been added has some new information which connects to a series of older blocks. Now this information is stored in an open source, decentralized environment in which each block's information is confirmable by every participating computer. It's open source, that means the source is publicly available. You can inspect and review that source. You can inspect and review that code. Likewise, it's a decentralized environment, simply meaning there's no single body or single controlling entity or authority. There's no single point of failure. This data, this information, these records, they're stored with thousands of people. And because it's confirmable by every participating computer, that means every node, every computer, every participant can independently verify the data that exists on this particular ledger. So blockchain is designed to have a decentralized management instead of the traditional hierarchical systems. So blockchain functions in this decentralized way, and that's one of the features of blockchain. Now you can see this diagram and schematic on your screen, which just gives you a visualization of what that blockchain would be looking like, where every block is storing information, yet it's connected to the previous block or the parent block. And these blocks are now forming this entire database, which is decentralized, and thousands of computers and nodes are verifying the authenticity of the information and records stored on this particular ledger. Some of the characteristics of high potential use cases for blockchain involve the existence of a shared repository. So if multiple people are using or need to use a repository, that's a potential high use case for blockchain. Likewise, if there's multiple individuals, parties, institutions writing entries, uploading or appending or adding information records, then that's again another strong use case for blockchain. In addition, if there's minimal trust between these parties, maybe these parties have never engaged before and they exist across the world. Now, for them to be able to engage in a trustless manner, blockchain provides the very tools, nuts and bolts to be able to engage in an ecosystem without requiring higher level of trust that a central party typically provides. Similarly, if there's multiple intermediaries and you want to cut intermediaries out, maybe you want to reduce the number of intermediaries, then that's another high potential case for blockchain, because the very infrastructure of blockchain allows the reduction and diminishing of multiple intermediaries, because many of the activities, services provided by different intermediaries, especially in the financial system, can be automated on chain. And therefore, we can remove multiple parties, reducing cost, increasing efficiency and speed on blockchain. Another high potential use case of blockchain is when there's transactional dependencies, where there's an entire sequence and a process with multiple parties coming in at different sprints, engaging with different parties, doing different things, inputting different transactions. Now, when that's the case and there's interdependencies, blockchain is very powerful in coordinating and bringing all those different parties together in one virtual environment. Before looking at how blockchain actually functions and how the ledger's state is updated, let's just understand what data actually exists on a blockchain. So the ledger is distributed across many participants in the network, and it doesn't exist in one place, as we've mentioned before. But these ledgers can contain different types of shared data. It can be transaction records, attributes of transactions, credentials, or other pieces of information. A block could represent transactions and data of many types. It could be digital currency, digital rights, intellectual property, identity, property titles, to name a few. Blockchain is not specific to the financial system. It's just a database. Any type of information can be appended to the blockchain and can be added to the blockchain. It doesn't have to be purely financial just because we have digital assets and it's working in the decentralized financial system. Blockchain's use cases are not limited to or restricted to the financial ecosystem. Now, the power of blockchain is that you can achieve internet level consensus about the state and authenticity of a block's content. That's the power. So now you no longer need a centralized body or authority affirming the state, accuracy, and truthfulness of a record or of a ledger. Rather, you can have millions of individuals, unrelated, completely unconnected, atomized, in the most random corners of the world, verifying and attesting to the validity and authenticity of the information stored in this database. That is internet level authentication and consensus. That's the power of blockchain. That's what blockchain now provides to the world. And so every node that participates in the network can verify the true state of the ledger. It's not restricted to one person or a few individuals. You can run your own software and be a node. Anybody can join this operation. It's not limited or restricted to a person with particular qualifications or licenses. You just need the hardware and the software to be able to then run a node, run the software, and join this entire ecosystem. And that's why when we talk about transactions on blockchains, all we have to really understand, it's not just a transaction. Whenever a person is engaging with digital assets, you're effectively telling the people in this ecosystem, the world, that update this database with this new piece of information. What's the new piece of information? That I have transferred X to this third party. So whenever we're transacting, really all we're doing is we are rebalancing. Yes, we are telling people that this balance needs to change if it's something like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But more importantly, and taking a step back and looking at it from a bird's eye view, what we're doing is simply telling the world to change the information held in this ledger and database, and that there needs to be a change. That's all that's happening. So every transaction is a digitally signed proposal to change state. Think of it in that way. Every transaction on blockchain is a digitally signed proposal to alter and change the state of the ledger. And only when the network, this entire network globally accepts this, does this block now become permanent, this state be updated. And the ledger reflects this new reality which you proposed a while ago. So that's what's happening on blockchain. Now, one of the drivers behind the usage of blockchain is that it resolves what's known as the double spend problem. What's the double spend problem? That's the problem that exists in the digital world where you can have something digital being copied multiple times, and an individual or a party could use the same unit multiple times or twice effectively. The fix that blockchain provides is that everyone agrees to a single time-ordered record so that each unit is only used once and accepted once based on this time stamping, based on the sequencing, and based on the sequencing provided by blockchain. So it solves the double spend problem that would exist in other digital environments. And that's why you typically have a central party or an authority ensuring your bank balances and these types of things when settlements are taking place and money is being transferred and moved. A similar concept occurs there. Likewise, in the blockchain rails, we also need a similar function. And so the blockchain technology allows us to solve that problem based on the very infrastructure and the very protocol that blockchain operates on. What blockchain really does is it replaces the trusted intermediary with a verifiable state, cryptographic ownership, and programmable settlement. It's these three things that blockchain is really providing and bringing forth to the conversation, because these three elements together make a general purpose modular financial system possible, which anyone and everyone can use and build on. So these three elements is what blockchain brings to the fore and allows the building, development, and use of a functioning and functional financial system. So if we just zoom in on the slide and look at how blockchain works, and again, this is a high-level description of how blockchain is working, and we'll go down more at a granular level shortly. But what's happening in blockchain? Well, a transaction is being requested, remember, the transaction is simply somebody saying, I want to update this database. I want to change the information, or I want to update the information. That's what a transaction effectively is. Then a block that represents the transaction is created. This block has multiple forms or multiple entries within it. It hasn't yet been crystallized or been approved. Yet it's been created. It sits in a mempool or in a pending or waiting room. This block is then sent to every node in the network. So whoever is participating in keeping this network secure, they receive this information. The nodes then try to validate the transaction. Those nodes or that node which validated the transaction receives a reward for the work that it's done, because there's effort, labor, time, computation, electricity required there. And that's the incentive that they are now rewarded for that energy they have expended. A block is added to the existing blockchain and the transaction is complete. So that's the typical life cycle of a transaction at a high level. Before we look at the step-by-step process of how a blockchain works, remember, a financial system typically needs 5 things for it to function properly. It needs trust, transparency, the ability to settle transactions, so settlement, information, and connectivity. It's these 5 elements which are really building the entire or supporting the entire financial system that we engage in on a daily basis. And it's these elements which allow us now to engage confidently and which lubricates the entire system, which makes it conducive and efficient. Without these 5 elements, there would be mass inefficiency in a financial system. So when we talk about blockchains, they don't really remove intermediaries or change things dramatically. Rather, they're rebalancing most of what we know. So blockchains, they don't really remove intermediaries as such or change things dramatically. Rather, they rebalance what we must trust and what we engage with. That's what's really happening. So there's like a rebalancing going on. So cryptography and consensus rules, they replace discretionary control with verifiable rules. That's the role cryptography plays here, and consensus protocols. Likewise, you have shared ledgers, which improve the auditability of the records and information. You have smart contracts with atomic settlement, which cuts the reconciliation and counterparty risk that exists in the normal financial system. You have open standards which enable composition between different markets. You still have some intermediaries and real-world entities engaging with the blockchain and DeFi ecosystem, and they are needed. For instance, your off-ramping, on-ramping entities, your stablecoin issuers, your oracles, your auditors, governance bodies. They power and help the stability of this decentralized financial system. Now let's dive in and look at exactly what's happening at a more granular level in blockchain. How is it actually functioning and working? Because the Sharia questions will begin to emerge as we analyze the operations of a blockchain. And then when we talk about staking shortly, you'll understand the Sharia questions even better. So the first thing in blockchain is the creation and authorization of a transaction. You're simply telling your wallet what to do and who to pay. That's the first thing that happens when we are engaging with blockchain. So if it's Bitcoin style kind of digital asset, where it's based on the UTXO model or the unspent transactional output model, where your wallet simply picks one or more digital asset entries that you have and you're telling it to now move it over to somebody else, that's a change to the ledger which you are proposing. Or it can be the Ethereum style, which is more of an accounts-based style. You're simply specifying the recipient, and through your wallet, you are requesting that you want this amount in your Ethereum account to move over to this particular individual. So you specify the recipient, the amount, the nonce, which is your sequence number, to go to a particular individual with your fees. And then you sign this transaction with your private keys. That's your digital signature, your private digital signature that you are now stamping this particular request with. Anybody else can verify this signature based on your public key, and it proves that you have authorized this yourself because there's a link between the private key and the public key. So that's the first kind of step where you're creating and authorizing a transaction. What happens next in this process of blockchain and in the spending on blockchain? Your transaction or request is broadcasted and it's queued. So your wallet then sends a message to all the other peers. There's no central server per se. All the peers involved, the nodes involved, these individuals, these computers involved, they receive this message from you and your wallet. Each node will then do its checks before it holds this in its mempool. What's a mempool? It's just like a quarantine or a waiting room. They'll check, is the signature valid? Is the formatting correct? Do you have the balance that which you are requesting to be sent? Is the nonce correct? Is the gas limit stable and sensible? These are all the things which are checked. If all of that is well and good, the transaction or this request sits as pending. If it's not, it's rejected at that particular point and moment. So that's step 2, where you are broadcasting and your transaction is queued. Step 3 is where now the block construction occurs. The miner or validator, the one who will propose a block and propose new information to update this database, that's what mining and validation really is, where you are proposing to update the state of this decentralized ledger by checking all the details, making sure it's all correct, and you are then asking everybody to agree on this new state. So the block producer, the miner, the validator, will gather a set of pending transactions, orders them, does all the checks, make sure everything's correct, and proposes to build this block. Step 4 then is where independent verification occurs, where the node themselves receives the block. It never trusts the miner or producer. It rechecks a block from scratch, going through all the details, validating all the information. If anything is wrong, if it's overspending taking place, there's wrong nonce there's invalid signatures, there's too much gas being paid, it will reject the block. So everything has to be in order and everything is checked by these other nodes that are in the ecosystem. Number 5 is where consensus and chain selection occurs. So up here, your transaction is placed in a specific block. Once it's in that block, every node will treat that order as a reference point for all later calculations. Similarly, if there's 2 rival blocks, there's 2 competing sets of information, then the fork choice is applied, or the rule that the protocol has on how to deal with conflicting information is applied at this particular moment. And so everyone then, as a result, is synced on one true state of information. Because of this sifting out, there's one state which remains. And because of that, then number 6, the state is updated. All the nodes, they update the ledger and they confirm the final state that this is now the real state of transactions, balance movements, of information being traded, exchanged, moved on this particular ledger. If it's a UTXO model, remember the node will delete the outputs you've spent and add the new outputs you've created. If it's an account model like Ethereum, the node updates the balances, increments nonces, and applies any smart contract storage changes exactly as the executed code dictated. And then finally, there's settlement and finality. This is where the network considers the change state on the ledger as final and you treat it as settled. Now look, from a Sharia compliance perspective, what are the Sharia issues, or are there any Sharia issues here? All you're doing is you're engaging with a ledger, a database. It's as though you're simply using an eraser or rubber and updating a ledger, or you're making an entry in a new book or on a different page. That's all you're doing. You have pages of information. All you're doing is turning the page and adding a new entry on this new page with the date at the top of the page. Now, from a Sharia compliance perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just writing entries in a ledger. Where the discussion happens in blockchain, and as we discussed in the previous episode, is it depends on what you are recording. And if you are processing transactions which are non-Sharia compliant and which you are finalizing the movement of or validating transactions which are not Sharia compliant, that's where the issue is, and that we should avoid. So if there's a blockchain specific to non-compliant transactions, non-compliant activity, then a person should not be engaging in validating those transactions, because that is powering that system. And we don't want to power harmful activities, because everything non-compliant is typically harmful. It's either harmful spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially. And that's why most prohibitions in Islamic finance, if you really look at them, there's some kind of harm, either financial, spiritual, social, moral, mental, and that's the reason why they prohibit it. If a blockchain is now supporting those harmful activities, then it would not be Sharia compliant to power such a blockchain, to be a node, to validate, and to engage with that particular blockchain, especially if you are engaging in unlawful transactions. Now, let's just zoom in. What's exactly in a block? When you talk about blocks and we're talking about blockchain, what's inside a block? So a block can be divided into two parts. You have the header, and then you have the body. The header has like the proof and pointers. It connects itself to the previous block. It's showing you what it's built upon, what it contains, and the proof that it's created correctly. That's what's in the header. The body is where the actual changes are registered. So what changes are we proposing, and which changes have materialized in this database? It's contained in the block body. So as you can see, there's a block header. The header has the metadata. Yeah, it's data which collects the rest of the data, or data summarizing the other data. Where you can see block N1, block N plus 1. This is the metadata. It's a small field whose exact meaning depends on the chain. Bitcoin or Ethereum, that information will be different. If it's Bitcoin, it'll be a version number indicating which rule is being followed on these blocks. And if it's Ethereum, it's the block number which is stored in the header. So that's what it means by block N1, N plus. Timestamps help order blocks. That's what it's doing. The timestamping is extremely important because that's what's creating this sequence and the ability to have this record without creating this double spend or fixing the double spend issue. The previous block hash is a 32-byte fingerprint of the parent block's header. So because these blocks of information are connected, the previous block, which is a parent block, is connected to this new block through this previous block hash. So this previous block hash is a fingerprint of the previous block, and it's what is linking this new block or this child block to the parent block. If anyone alters information in the previous block or in the parent block, then that will impact the hash in this child block. And that's how we know that the information has been tampered with. So the last block will give you a snapshot of everything else, meaning by somebody changing anything, it'll result in a domino effect of changes, which will signal to the entire network that there's been a change which has occurred somewhere. It's been tampered with, and that's a problem. It'll be rejected. The Merkle root is simply a fingerprint that summarizes every transaction in this block. So if any transaction changes, this fingerprint will change. And then finally, the block body, which is the core part where there's all this information that's stored. It's the signed messages from the participants requesting a change of state in the ledger. So this body holds together all these requests from multiple people requesting, sending transactions that they want this amount to be transferred to this particular person. So these are the requests from participants of digital asset holders who want to change the state of the entire blockchain. This is just another schematic that you can see on your screen, which gives you a visualized overview of what is going on within individual blocks. You have this block header and the body of the block, which stores the information and all these transactional requests in which sit in there, and these updated pieces of information. The next part of our discussion really, which is on proof of work, proof of stake, this kind of validation that happens and this block selection process. How does that all work? What's actually happening is what we're going to be diving into now. But to summarize the first part of the discussion, we talked about blockchain. We understood how blockchain actually works, what's going on, what blockchain is, why we need it or why it's useful. The truth is, not everybody needs blockchain on Earth, but it has tremendous utility for those use cases we highlighted earlier. But now we want to zoom into the actual discussion of today, which is mining and staking, and specifically looking at staking as an activity. What is proof of work? Well, if you just look at your screen and you can see the proof of work concept, Bitcoin and many other famous digital assets. So you have Litecoin, Bitcoin, you have Dogecoin. They use the consensus algorithm of proof of work. So that's what's used, this computational mechanism, which helps in adding new blocks and verifying, validating, and creating consensus on the state of the ledger. So what does a proof of work transaction look like? So if you look at what happens when we are sending one Bitcoin or a Bitcoin or Satoshi to somebody else, you have Alice who wants to buy a product from Bob using Bitcoin. She uses her private key and signs a message with the amount of Bitcoins and Bob's address requesting a transaction. The transaction requested by Alice is bundled into a block with other transactions. It's not been approved yet. Remember, it goes into this queue. The block is broadcasted to all mining nodes in the Bitcoin network. The network of nodes validates Alice's transaction using algorithms in a process called mining. The first miner to validate a new block for the blockchain receives a portion of the Bitcoin as reward. The transaction is complete and the new block is added to the blockchain. The block is permanent and cannot be modified. And Bob receives his Bitcoin from Alice. So that is proof of work. Proof of work, it makes you spend computing power. It makes you put energy and resources behind proving what you're doing and what you are attesting to. That's why cheating becomes very expensive, because to mine requires tremendous hardware and software, energy, electricity. It's not a cheap activity. And so there's a cost involved. A person would only do this if they are going to get something greater in return, because no sane person spends or has expenses without something greater in return. So at any moment, whenever somebody spends or incurs a cost, it's because they believe the thing that they're receiving, the asset they're receiving in return, has more value or benefit to them, has more utility than what's being spent. How about a proof of stake validation then? So again, if you look at the 6 steps on the screen, proof of stake is slightly different from how proof of work operates, but it's the same outcome. We want to validate, prove transactions, and finalize this data on the ledger. So a validator stakes some coins. A pseudo-random algorithm selects the next validator. The selected validator creates the new block to be added. Other non-selected validators verify this new block. The new block is added to the blockchain. The selected validator earns the transaction fees as reward. So that's a high-level view of what's happening in proof of stake. Effectively, in proof of stake, what's happening is we are selecting, or an individual is selected. Now that the selection can happen in multiple ways, and they are then chosen to validate, verify, review these transactions, make sure everything's correct, and append this data now to the ledger. And they are rewarded for that activity. So that once they are selected, they do this and they are then rewarded. Remember, the proof of work name says it all. You are having to do work in that you are running this software, this mining operation. So many resources are being spent. The goal is to find a hash, this number that is numerically below the set target, the network set target. Whoever gets that number effectively wins. It's kind of like it's a race to find and to compute the number set by the network. And that number is so difficult. That's why it requires so much computation resources. It's not gambling. People think this is gambling. It's not really gambling because you are just racing. It's a race and the network gives a reward. Everybody's using their own resources. And that's why it's not qimar or gambling, because it's not like everybody's assets are being transferred to one person. The network itself is creating the reward. And there's always a transaction fee. Those people who are sending digital asset from one person to another person, there's typically some transaction fees involved with that. Part of that forms the reward for the person. So that's just a fee, like an ujra, a fee, a service fee given to whoever verifies, validates the entire process. And that's absolutely permissible because it's against a valid service. Hence, it's important to remember this is not gambling, because people misconstrue or misunderstand proof of work and mining as gambling. It can't be gambling because it's not that people are staking their wealth and chancing up here. Nobody's staking their wealth or betting their wealth, and it's not like winner wins all and losers lose all. Rather, a person just tries his best to compete. He's not giving his resources to anybody else, and nobody's winning from other people. They are gaining simple transaction fees from those people themselves transacting and transferring, plus the network itself is creating a reward. Proof of stake, as the name says, you are staking something. Now, up here again, people will think it's gambling, but really it's not gambling at all. When you stake, what do we mean? Staking simply means you are locking up, you are putting collateral down, showing that you are being truthful. I'm only willing to put something on the line if I believe in what I'm doing. So when I'm staking, I'm simply surrendering some assets of mine to say, look, I truly am being honest up here, and I will not act in a malicious way, or in a harmful way, in a deceitful way, and I will be validating the transactions in an honest way. And if I don't do that, look, my assets are here, you can penalize me. That's what is happening in staking. So staking, again, is not gambling, it's not betting, you're not wagering or chancing with other people. It is just a way for people to be selected, number one, to do this kind of like operation of validation. And number two, it's to show that you have something to lose if you act maliciously. And it's disincentivizing malpractice and bad behavior. That's what staking is about. If somebody had nothing to lose, then what stops them from approving or trying to change and lie when updating these records on this database? What stops them from trying to misconstrue the information? Nothing. But when you have assets on the line, you have collateral, you have something to lose, you are less likely to act in a malicious and in a harmful manner. That's the benefit of having a stake there. Now let's look at how staking actually works now. So staking has really three separate areas. First is the pre-stake, what happens before the actual staking operation occurs. Number two is the staking operation itself. And number three is post-staking. When you're pre-staking or before staking actually occurs, what happens is you need to install a node client, effectively software. You just need to download the software, you connect it to other nodes, download all the recent blocks, check the validity, and you build a local database of the ledger and the state. And that is then continuously talking to other peers. So it's connected online and you are now running this software. This client or software is really where everything's occurring, because your validator needs to see the same truth as everyone else so you can build upon this correct block and this truth that you have. Once you've installed this client, you now need to generate and secure a validator key. So you need to create a dedicated signing pair used only for consensus messages. You don't want this key pair or this digital signature to be known publicly. This private key is encrypted and is kept remote so nobody else can access it. At the same time, you need to set a withdrawal destination. So you set out a payout address, a credential that tells the protocol where funds must go when you stop. So any rewards that you gain, the address, where will this go? The network will pay attention to the signatures from this particular key that you have provided. That's what's happening when you are generating and securing a validator key. And finally, to be approved or to be admitted in the staking operation, you need to now submit a transaction. You need to stake something. You need to put forward some digital assets. So if it's Ethereum, you need to lock up Ether. If it's Solana, you need to propose some Sol tokens or put forward some Sol tokens. You simply send a transaction, that's what's happening up here, and you're locking up some digital assets. This explanation is on the basis of solo staking or native staking. We are looking at staking from a solo staking perspective because everything else will fit under this explanation anyway. If you're doing a dedicated staking, or you're doing staking as a service, or you are doing staking in a pool, all of these points will naturally manifest somewhere in those operations. When we are submitting a staking deposit, what's actually happening? This is where some people's Sharia question is typically asked. People assume that you're lending tokens to somebody else. You're not lending tokens to anybody, because when you're locking up tokens and when you're staking, it means you are removing some tokens from your balance and your wallet to another smart contract or to another wallet address, which is locked now for a while. So if it's Ethereum, they have like a protocol escrow account effectively. You deposit exactly 32 Ether into this deposit contract. Your tokens will sit in this beacon chain deposit contract. It has its own address, and your Ether on the execution layer is effectively burnt. And now you have this new balance on this beacon chain. So for that moment in time, you are not able to use those particular staked assets because now they are staked, they're locked up in this wallet or in this address. Remember, the contract is simply just a code. It has no private key owner, so nobody else can use the assets in this particular address or in this particular smart contract. The contract has rules programmed in it and how it works. Nobody can remove and withdraw those funds. Your Ether on your Ethereum account changes. The balance effectively changes, and you have a credit now in the beacon chain with your validator key. Your public validator key shows your balance there. Your validator public key, remember, is connected to your private key. So because you have the private key still, only you can now control this particular entry. Nobody else can do that. When it's unlocked, only you have that ability. You are still owning that deposit because you have the validator keys, and those validator keys are used for operations such as signing attestations and blocks, initiating a voluntary exit, and if you want to rotate or change anything, it's that key that you have that gives you that control. Similarly, you have access rights and withdrawal credentials because the protocol will be sending out rewards to the address associated with that public key. Nobody else can change that. And the protocol guarantees that the smart contract must return funds to your withdrawal address. So it will not go to somebody else. It's all automated and programmed from before. And it's enforced by consensus rules. So no other single party can change or steal your funds and tap into your funds. So as you can see, when you're staking and locking up in this particular part of the staking operation, you are not lending money to somebody else. And that's why the rewards that you earn can't be riba. It can't be interest. Because all you've done is really put your assets in a smart contract, its address. You still have access to that, or meaning your keys are pointing to the public key there. It has a connection. So only you have right to that. The address which you had set up earlier when you were setting up and generating your validator key, that address is the recipient and beneficiary of any rewards that come through from the staking operation. And when you exit and withdraw, it'll only be, again, a one-way. It'll only come to you. It's not going to go to anybody else. That's why this is not a loan. And the rewards that you earn are not riba in any way, shape or form. In Solana, there's a difference. There's a special account type on Solana which you are transferring your staked assets to. It has its own address. But the same idea applies again. You hold the private keys that control it. Nobody else can withdraw it. It's just like another account, and it's kept there and you have access to that. It's locked up for the period, but you can request to exit and withdraw. And once it's approved, then your assets will be released again and come back to you. So in terms of the second phase of staking, what's actually happening then? You start the validator software and you need to perform your duties as a validator. So in staking, you need to do multiple things. You need to assemble a candidate block from pending transactions. You need to check them, see if the state is correct. You need to verify the information. You need to sign a short vote confirming what you see on the chain is correct. All of these activities you perform as a validator. Likewise, you follow the fork choice and finality in that your software continuously applies the protocol's fork choice, which means that if there was a divergence or difference in blocks proposed, then which one is selected? The rules which power that is what we're talking about here. That activity is also taking place at this particular point. Once you've done the activity and you've been selected, suggestions has been approved, we go to post-stake activity, which is now at regular intervals, what's known as epochs and eras. At these intervals, the protocol updates your validator balance. So you are now rewarded with fees and rewards. So you get more digital assets. Wherever the native asset is of that blockchain, you'll receive. And then finally, after you receiving the rewards, you can exit. You simply submit an exit message and you can now stop your staking operations. Now, of course, many people, they don't, or these nodes, or how it works now, there's institutional staking taking place. Thousands of people involved by institutions in staking activity. That is an ongoing process, typically. It's not like how it would happen before in solo staking, where a person may simply exit. Rather, this is like a continuous staking operation where people are doing this as an income generating mechanism. Now you can see on your screen just a simple overview of how Ethereum works and staking in Ethereum actually works. And it's from Avada. They're giving an overview of how their software and hardware would work in staking operations. So again, it's a similar steps. You set up your client, set up your keys, you perform your duties, and then you exit with your rewards. It's simple as that. There's those 4 steps involved. Solana, on the other hand, as you can see, similar concept. You delegate. If you're using delegation now and you're doing delegated staking, you can delegate your Solana tokens or your SOL to a validator. The validator will secure and process transactions. The network itself mints SOL as a reward. And then you, being part of this validation process, you earn a share of the rewards. There are different forms of staking that take place. You have native staking, which is what we were talking about right now, which is solo staking, where the owner of digital assets themselves, they buy the software and the hardware, or download the software and buy the hardware to run a staking operation at home and personally. You can have staking as a service, where holders of digital assets use the technical solution of a staking as a service provider. You can have liquidity pool staking, where staking own assets in a liquidity pool using the technical infrastructure of a liquidity pool. You can have liquidity staking, which is slightly different and we'll look at shortly, where you are staking, but this protocol now gives you liquid tokens, which can be used elsewhere. So unlike the typical staking that we are used to, or we've discussed right now, is another form of staking whereby when you deposit your assets and lock up your assets, you receive liquid staking tokens. So for instance, you gave Ether, you receive staked Ether, STETH. And now that has liquidity, can be used in DeFi, in decentralized finance, and it can be used as collateral. It can also be used as another staking operation. Finally, there's delegated staking, where you delegate and select a validator and work with one validator, and there's multiple people then behind this one validator supporting them to do the validation work, and then you take a share and cut of the fees and rewards that come through. Now, let's look at the Sharia analysis of all of this, which is really the core discussion. And you might be thinking we've spent almost an hour discussing how staking works and how blockchain works, and we're talking about the Sharia now. It's because if we don't understand the reality of something, we cannot apply Sharia rules to it. We have to talk through and go through the granular details, and all of us be on one page, in the same page, before we start thinking about Sharia rules and Sharia principles. That's why we talked about blockchain. We understood really blockchain is just a ledger. There's no gambling taking place in proof of work, in proof of stake. You're not really lending your tokens. We understood what's actually happening and the processes that are taking place. Now, when we think about it from a Sharia perspective, of course, we mentioned number one, and the primary thing is you don't want to be involved in a staking operation or proof of work operation where the blockchain is involved in unlawful transactions, unlawful activity, or the ledger is a ledger for interest-based activity or gambling, for instance, where you are now involved in validating entries of interest-based transactions and interest for a particular individual. So any ecosystem, any blockchain which does that, you would not take part in that because that activity itself is not Sharia compliant. Remember, we talked about blockchain is not just to do with financial transactions. It can be anything. So any information, executing unlawful activity, or that information is a proof for unlawful activity, it'll be problematic to engage with that blockchain, stake in that blockchain, or even do mining in that blockchain. That needs to be avoided altogether. But then, okay, if everything is okay, just say the blockchain is neutral, which is typically the case. It's just a transfer of money. I want to transfer this amount to this particular individual, and I want the ledger to be reflecting this reality. Is that Sharia compliant? Then of course it's Sharia compliant. The question is typically raised, well, what if that transaction was unlawful? For instance, I'm staking or I'm mining. Somebody is sending Bitcoin to somebody else, and that Bitcoin itself is interest on a loan in fiat currency. And here you are now mining, and you are now mining that operation, and you are now securing that particular movement of money and validating that transaction. Now, of course, if you knew this, that would be a problem. But here the issue is you don't know, and the asal in Sharia is, and the principle and default in Sharia is, things are permissible unless there's evidence of something being impermissible. So from a Sharia perspective, we don't live in this kind of like confused, skeptical world all the time where we are always doubting things and questioning things. The default from the Sharia principle is transactions are permissible. You can deem them to be permissible unless there's a clear evidence to you saying something is impermissible. So based on this principle, even though David may be sending interest, there's no way, shape or form that you and I can know that that's happening. There's no date to even suggest that. It's just a private transaction. That's why it would be permissible for these individuals, because they don't have any idea what's happening. As far as they're concerned, they are working off a valid Sharia basis, which is default being permissibility. And then that basis allows them and their activity to be lawful and valid. Even though that's a different reality, they have no knowledge of that. Because they have no knowledge of that, they cannot be mukallaf or bound and responsible, accountable for that particular activity. They have no knowledge and they have no idea of this. And they are working off and working from a valid Sharia position, which is default being permissibility. The question arises, okay, in staking now, what is staking? Because we discussed the life cycle of staking of an individual coming, depositing, running a client software, creating these validator keys, doing all this validation work, putting assets at stake, gaining a reward for the hard work. This cannot be Mudaraba from a Sharia perspective. Remember, Mudaraba is where two individuals come together. You have a Rabbul Mal and a Mudarib. You have an investor and a fund manager, or the capital provider and the manager. They come together. The manager is the one who does all the activity and fund management, and any profit that's gained is split between the parties. That's what Mudaraba is. So profits are shared, and if there's any loss is solely borne by the investor and the fund capital provider. That's not happening in staking, because there is no other party. When we're talking about solo staking specifically, you yourself are going on, running the operations. You are the manager and you are providing your assets as a stake, as a collateral. There's no investment taking place in anything else. Rather, you're simply providing a service. So it's not Mudaraba because you're not investing into something and you're not profit sharing. It's not Musharaka either, because in a solo stake, you are not pooling your funds with other people. So there's no Musharaka and profit share. Neither is it Ijaratul Khas. It's not a hiring of an individual, because there's no single contract with one person per se. Rather, any person can be selected, and whoever's selected, their job is to simply verify and validate and update the state of the blockchain. That's all they're doing, or at least proposing the block, and then being agreed upon by all the nodes. There's no kind of specific contract with an individual and a timing that you will do this work between 9 and 5, because Ijaratul Khas means employment. Nobody is employed within specific hours for a specific time with a specific scope of work. Rather, you can do multiple other tasks and staking with multiple parties at the same time. That's why it can't be an employment contract either. Remember, this is solo staking that we're talking about. We're not talking about liquidity pooling. We're not talking about staking as a service or delegated proof of stake. When that's the case, then what can the plausible Sharia analysis be? Well, really, staking can be any of these three depending on the particulars of any operation. But it can well be Ajir Mushtarak. You can be deemed as a contractor because you've come along, you've been selected to do some work. Now the timing is not defined, but the output is defined. In Ajir Mushtarak, where you have this Ijara as a contractor, where your services are employed by you or as functioning as a consultant, as a contractor, you can work for multiple people, you can do multiple things. You're not paid by the hour, rather you are paid based on the output. And that is the case up here. You're providing a valid service of validation, of running the software, of doing all of this work, and then you are paid accordingly. The second plausible interpretation from a Sharia perspective can be Wakala. Consider that Wakala can be conceptualized here by the protocol itself selecting you as its agent to verify and do the work. Then that can be a valid Wakala. The only discussion happens then is, can a protocol choose a Wakil? It's not so much as choosing a Wakil, rather you are functioning as a Wakil, even though you haven't been selected as a Wakil. So there's elements of Wakala there, in that you are doing something on behalf of the protocol and on behalf of everybody else. And therefore you're receiving an Ujra. And Wakil bil Ujra is really in the ruling of Ijara anyway. So we go back to the idea of Ijara. The third plausible understanding is a Juala contract. Juala is not accepted in the Hanafi school, but it's accepted across the Jumhur. Juala was this kind of reward-based contract or award-based giving. Somebody makes a proclamation and says, whoever does X will receive this reward. It doesn't require anyone to accept. It doesn't require any individual to agree terms with the party making this proclamation. Rather, whoever produces the result, whoever produces the condition, they are then entitled to the reward. That's how Juala works. And so if we look at staking from a Juala lens, the protocol is simply making this statement and proclamation. Whoever validates, whoever does the staking work will receive reward. Everybody competes to get selected. One individual or a pool or a delegate is selected to do the staking operation. They then, once they've done all the checks and approved everything or done everything and made sure everything is right, share this information with the rest of the nodes and it's approved. They get the fee. That is the work that went in and the reward. Now for Juala to be valid, the output must be known and the reward must be known, which is typically the case. You can work out and you generally know the rewards are being earned in staking. And likewise, the work is also defined and known, which is run through your software and your client. And the beautiful thing about Juala is it's not a requirement to agree on the scope of work, on how you'll do things in particular, what time you'll do things, or the who will do things, the level of work. Rather, the focus is purely on the outcome. That's why Juala is also another very plausible interpretation and way to understand solo staking. Now remember, this was all about solo staking. If you look at any other form of staking, the same thing will be happening at the staking level, which is either you can look at it as an Ijara of a Ajir Mushtarak, as a Wakala, as a Juala. That's right at the staking operation level. But before that, because you have other parties involved now, if it's a pool, if it's delegated, then there's some additional Sharia considerations. You need to make sure that if you're delegating and you have a delegated entity now staking, if they are sharing, on what basis are they sharing? Is it a profit share? Are they sharing rewards with you? If they are sharing rewards with you and they're not earning a fixed fee and they're not contributing any assets themselves either in the stake, rather they're only providing services and you're providing the assets, then this can be deemed to be a type of Mudaraba. But if all of you are contributing and they are doing a service on top, then it can be a Musharaka. It's not typically the same as a Musharaka and Mudaraba classically, in that your assets are simply being used as a stake. They are not being used in terms of trading. But this stake is essential to be selected. So you've contributed some assets for the operation and they are contributing services. So it's a mix of assets and services, which is again closer to, from a fiqh perspective, to a shirkatul a'mal, where the fuqaha have permitted this idea of one partner giving some assets, operating assets and capital assets to be used, and the other providing services, and you coming together now and providing this work and sharing the rewards. So that's also plausible. Another way to think of this is Wakala. If the delegated entity is earning a fixed fee, then the individuals are giving them a fixed fee from the rewards that they're getting, and that's acceptable from a Wakala perspective. And the individuals themselves, because they're all coming in as a group, there'll be a shirkatul milk. So they'll pool their assets together. They're non-fungible. They'll be put into a stake, but they all again have a claim and connection to that. They share and receive a portion of the reward fees that are generated from the underlying protocol based on as a result of staking. So these are the ways to understand any kind of pooled staking operation from a Sharia perspective. Again, it's not riba because there's no lending taking place up here. There's no gambling because nobody is chancing their wealth and betting their wealth. None of that's happening up here. This is a pure service that's being provided, a genuine service, a service which is required and desired by network participants. They want this, they need this to be able to have a true state of this blockchain. Yeah, that brings us to an end on this episode on staking. Do watch it a couple of times to make sure you've grasped all the information. But it's extremely important to know how blockchain works, how staking works technically, before there can be any Sharia commentary. In fact, it's not possible or even permissible to give a Sharia opinion if you have not studied the intricacies and details of anything for that matter. So that's why we went through and we tried to build the conversation up and understood how blockchain works, what blockchain is, how it actually operates, what proof of work is, what proof of stake is, how staking works, and then we discussed the Sharia thoughts and principles around staking. So stay tuned. Please do follow these series, and hopefully we'll see you in the next episode where we'll be discussing another emerging idea in the DeFi world and DeFi space. Remember, in these episodes on the Crypto Sharia series presented by Facet, we are going through everything to do with digital assets, staking, liquidity pooling, decentralized exchanges, stable coins, everything that is asked or every question that is typically raised from a Sharia compliance perspective. We hope to give a thorough and comprehensive answer in these series. So thank you so much for joining. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.